We appreciate you being back, and I'm sure they'll be in here in a minute. Up next is a panel of owners that we'd love to poke the minds of a little bit, and they're going to share with us some of their thoughts on construction in a VUCA world. Angela Skow is the Assistant Vice President and Regional Leader with CNA, longtime participant, and she's going to moderate the panel and introduce its members. So join me in welcoming Angela and friends.
So I was going to start by having Terry, would you like to introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about your company?
Sure. My name is Terry Hulet. I'm the Senior Director of Operations for AG&P Americas. The company's been around for roughly 120 years. Started in Virginia. It migrated over to the Philippines. That's our mother company. We've recently started AG&P Americas in the U.S. We're creating the American construction model, but we've got other entities associated with the model.
Okay, thank you. John?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm Jon Hayes. I'm the Vice President and General Manager of Construction for Nucor. Really responsible for the capital projects in the company right now. We have about $8 billion in capital for projects going on, a lot of growth. So this conversation about VUCA world will be very appropriate for today.
Great, thank you. And then Dave?
Yeah, Dave Gordon, Owens Corning, Director of Global Capital Sourcing. I lead a group of about 12 to 14 people around the globe, so we're a centrally led but regionally based team that supports all three major business units of Owens Corning, and we handle the strategic relationships as well.
Thank you. Chuck?
Sure, I'm Chuck Hardy. I'm the Chief Architect for the GSA, which is the federal government. We've been around for a couple hundred years as a company, doing well. We've got about 370 million square feet, and we pretty much work with you all and contractors in making it happen. So.
Okay. And Julia?
Julia DeRosi, I'm the Deputy Assistant Commissioner for GSA. I oversee the project delivery aspect of our business. GSA, in addition to the 370 million square feet, we have 227,000 vehicles that we also manage, about $75 billion in contracts across the board, of which we have $20.9 billion in design and construction.
Okay, thank you. All right, so we've got a great panel here today of owners, and we just heard from Joseph and Ben, and a lot of the things they commented on are things that our panel is also going to discuss from an owner's position. And I think we all heard about the customer view, the walk approach. Relationships are going to be key going forward in this world that we have today. And supply chain is definitely a huge issue. So I want to start with John and ask him a little bit about Nucor's strategic approach and advantage around sustainability and the products that the market and builders request.
Yeah, absolutely. I know everybody has supply chain issues, and there's a lot of drive for sustainability projects. And the perception around steel making and how steel's produced, I think sometimes has the wrong perception the way we produce steel in today's world with Nucor. We melt steel in an EAF versus the traditional old way of a BOF, which is way greener and way sustainable for projects. Sometimes we'd say Nucor was green before green was cool, and we've been doing that since 1969. So, you know, we have several products that we have out that can help you with your projects from net zero standpoint. We have AOS, which is a lighter and a stronger steel, which will of course reduce your carbon footprint. And I know there's a lot of issues, you would say, from supply chain, and can you actually, you know, get the steel you need? And, you know, we can meet those needs of what the market needs. We have utilization. Now there's other factors involved with that, whether it's, you know, trucking or timing issues, but, you know, the availability of what you need from a green standpoint and from a supply chain, we can get it and be ahead of the game.
Okay, thank you. And Chuck, from your view, I know that having enough materials to do the work and get the projects completed. Do you have any thoughts around this, what Jon had said?
Yeah, we're in an interesting time because usually the federal government steps in when the economy dips, and then we have some great buying power. And now we're coming in these VUCA times. And it is going back to where Kurt was probably a decade ago when we went out with 3XPT and AIA and AGC got together, when we started looking at integrated project delivery. It's going to take all of us to solve these issues that we have in front of us. And there's going to be new issues that pop up. And so the more we can kind of promote that integrated project delivery, the collaboration we have with industry, the better we're going to get to solve those.
And on integrated project delivery, I know in the past it's been done with a very complicated legal contract. Is there benefit in doing integrated project delivery just in the way you do business, whether or not you have that contract involved? Is that something that you guys think about?
I'll chime in from the government side. And certainly when you get to public sector versus private sector, there's a lot of constraints on what we can and can't do on contracts. And if you look at integrated project delivery, at the very root of it, it's a partnership. It's how you conduct business. It's how you trust each other. It's how you work together. And so if we put more focus on the people and teams we select, hopefully the contract doesn't come into play.
Okay, great. Thank you. So Dave, I'm going to ask you a question. From Owens Corning, outside of inflation and supply chain challenges, what have been Owens Corning's biggest challenges in your capital projects?
Yeah, so obviously supply chain inflation's heavy into that as well. We have three main types of projects. I think I've probably got the least amount of spend up here on an annual basis. So we're about $500 million per year. But in that $500 million, we have three main buckets of CapEx. So one is we're a glass manufacturer, or at least two of our divisions are. And so those furnaces, they're still significant projects, $30 to $50 million each, but we do 3, 5 each per year, forever. So we're good at those. So when we talk about partnerships and stuff, we have our partnerships. Everything you've heard so far today, it works. The second main buckets would be productivity or equipment, next generation equipment or automation. As a general rule, we do those very well in addition, with the exception of if we're doing new technology, sometimes we run into glitches and we have to work on that just because it's the first time. But all in all, we do that bucket of projects pretty well as well. Where Owens Corning is not meeting our own internal expectations would be on our growth projects. So if anyone that's followed Owens Corning, call it 6, 8 years ago, something like that, we were a $4 or $5 billion company. Now we're 8, 9 million or billion, I'm sorry, with aspirations. Public announced that we're trying to hit 10 billion by 2024. Historically, we've only done a greenfield, brownfield, major expansion. In my 20 years each of working for Owens Corning, in the first decade, we'd probably do one of those every 2 to 3 years. And by the time that one's done, then we have another one. But we very rarely had 2 or 3 overlapping. Fast forward with the growth that I just tried to explain, now we have 2 or 3 on top of each other. But whether it be our skill set internal to Owens Corning, whether it be our partnerships that we've had over the years, they're all geared, not all, but they're mainly geared around our past. And so we have the right partnerships with, on the rebuilds and the equipment, but on the growth, we don't. So that's probably our biggest challenge. And then inside of that challenge, and try to feed off of some of the things that were said this morning, but trying to change, maybe add a new flavor to it. But when we are looking at trying to clean up our own house, our policy, it's a real sexy subject here, but our policies and procedures are probably one of our biggest challenges. So inside of Owens Corning, we go through our state gate process, probably much like everyone here. But once we get to that plus or minus 10%, that, depending on the level, but for growth projects, 100% of the time, something like that, would require our board of directors approval. So first, we obviously have to go through our executive committee, but then we go to our board of directors. So when we get, part of those rules and policies is when we go to that level, our policies do not allow us to go over 10% of what we got approved. Okay. So when we write contracts, or the constructive comment I heard a little bit ago about a lawyer, or people in the sourcing or commercial side, we are the gatekeepers of rules and policies, procedures. It's one of our functions. So one of our challenges in this VUCA period, with all the inflation, all the supply chain, then extended schedule, which then time is money, looking at the question, but answering it from cleaning up our own house, we have some maybe some revisiting of rules and policies and levels of authority.
Okay, thank you. All right, Julia, I've got one for you. Although we are in a different time than March 2022, we all experienced a high degree of volatility, uncertainty, and supply chain disruption during the pandemic. What is one lesson learned during that time, and how might this teach us how to handle today and tomorrow?
So I know almost every organization has their own story of what they endured in 2020 and even the last 3 years, right? VUCA is here to stay. I think most organizations focused on two things immediately. The first being safety of their workforce, their people. The second is minimizing your financial exposure. That's when you started to hear about force majeure. Ben talked about that, right? And everyone was trying to solve this separately. I think one of the most valuable lessons for GSA was we went through our Rolodex, right? We started to call folks, hey, how are you guys paying your contractors? We wanted to keep our job sites open. We wanted to make sure that progress progressed. And basically you saw those 2 points on the spectrum emerge. Innovation, and then you also had risk management. I leaned in on the innovation side, called a couple folks, hey, how are you guys paying? And we introduced a virtual inspections pilot that helped us access our job sites, tap into our subject matter experts to get onto those sites. And I think in most cases, when you have a situation where you have little resources and you're still able to deliver, that's peak performance, right? And I know every organization has that MacGyver moment of where they were able to fulfill something that seemed very challenging. But the big takeaway for me was call your industry contacts, collaborate. The partnerships and how we address problems cannot be isolated anymore. It is a collective problem, and we need to be able to address that together.
Okay, thank you. On the collaboration and the efforts and reaching out to people and calling them, did you run into any problems with some of the workforce that doesn't want to talk on the phone, but they just want to text, and trying to reach that whole generation that is not as collaborative and on a face-to-face basis?
I'm probably the worst person that has to answer that, but I'm terrible at text, right? There's just so many different ways to communicate with one another, and I know for GSA, we were really well positioned to enter 100% remote operations because of our shift in workplace. And maybe Chuck, if you want to elaborate a little bit on how we made that shift for virtual and our Google platform.
Yeah, we moved to Google early 2000s, and as we started to position ourselves, it was toward that agility and resiliency we've been hearing about today and what you're looking for. And so when things do happen, you're prepared to kind of shift to that. So when you talk about communications, we did have digital filing access. We did have ways to communicate via chat, via video conferencing, via email. I mean, there's about 7 different ways to get in touch with somebody. And so you start to explore what makes the most sense for the teams you're dealing with. Mm-hmm. And don't try to get overly processed or dictate, mandate we're going to all do this one or that one. Whatever the team makes, what makes sense for the team made sense for us, kind of thing. But we created enough options that gave the agility and flexibility needed for that.
That's great, thank you. So Terry, you're way down there on the end, but so I'm going to ask you, in your 45 years of experience in your career. Have you ever experienced anything remotely close to what's taking place in the industry today?
Yes, Angela. I guess the one thing that comes to mind would be the 2008-2009 recession. And if I recall back, as we were going through some of those difficult times, what I saw develop was most of the capital work pretty much come to a halt. A lot of the major contractors that had maintenance contracts where they had a continuous presence, they even went to the degree of running like skeleton maintenance crews back during 2008, 2009. So if you take that perspective around the recession, you compare it to where we are today, if I look at the two different scenarios, I would say in the VUCA world, COVID hit. So we basically saw what happened in 2008, 2009, when COVID hit, the capital work pretty much come to a halt. None of the owners wanted to spend any money because of the uncertainty. Maintenance crews, once again, they were reduced. And then as we started to come out of COVID, the big difference between the recession and where we are today is when we come out of the recession, we somewhat returned to the norm. We went back to doing capital work, maintenance work. But today, coming out of COVID, what's come into the mix or come into play is there's a lot of industries coming into the United States now around clean energy. There's manufacturing facilities, and a lot of these projects are multi-billion-dollar projects. So we can talk about that probably a little bit more and maybe provide some input on how we better manage some of the challenges that we have today. But that would be the best comparison I could make based on my career.
Okay, thank you. Chuck, there are a couple of things that influence your actions. One, your federal government, and your clients are all federal agencies. And two, your focus is predominantly the commercial office sector. With all the buzz around hybrid work and the future of work in the office, how do you address the volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity?
Good question. I heard a quote recently. It was, the Stone Age didn't end because we ran out of stones. It ended because of technology. And technology caused a transformation in how people did their work. So when you have, Julia just mentioned remote site inspections, it caused everybody to start looking at, how am I doing my work? How did I do my work in the last couple, 3 years? What needed to be done on site? What needed to be done in this location or that location? And it's going to come out differently. It's not going to be, it's not like, let's say, a forest fire in Yellowstone that brings up new trees and it looks the same later. It's going to be a different conditions we're coming out of this in, but a more informed condition. And so from the federal government, we're working with agencies to get people to start making some decisions, which are tough, public and private sector, to get folks to be comfortable with being directionally accurate. You don't need to know the exact path, but let's be directionally accurate and make a decision. Because right now, the thing that's causing most actions are lease expirations. Lease expires, got to do something. We've got to get past that to, let's start looking at our core business practices, let's start looking at how we're doing things, and then start to create models around that on how we do that. And the same goes for the construction industry. We had, when we first started integrated project delivery and had those conversations, it was looking at, I don't want to say decades old, a centuries old process of doing construction. And saying, what if we were venture capitalists and somebody had an idea to build something? What would it look like? How would you put it together? And I think that's what the office market and that's what the industry is, actually just the general purpose industry is looking at, is how do we put this out, put this together differently and come out better for it? I'll just quote one other quote that it was actually Neil Young misquoting Chopin. He said, he was asked, you know, how do you create music and what do you do? He goes, I've never created anything, I just remember things differently. And I think coming out of this, we just have to remember work differently and figure out what that is.
Okay, thank you. With your agency clients making facility decisions, are they mostly taking a wait-and-see mode today, or how are you dealing with that?
It's that concept of everybody wants to be the first, but nobody wants to be first. And it's challenging. And so what we're doing is, and I'm an architect, so I come from an architect background. In the past, it used to be if I drew it, if I built it, that's it, and deal with it, live with it, and move forward kind of thing. But we're moving back into where we truly are creative problem solvers in the architecture industry and the design industry. And so it becomes a co-creation with our clients to say, what problem are you trying to solve? Let's walk through that together. We don't know what a day in the life of anybody in this room looks like. Let's have that conversation, and let's figure out how do we meet those needs and meet that intent. So it is a heavy lift and a true partnership, not only with our clients, but then also with our service providers to make sure we can deliver on those promises that we're coming up with. So.
Great, thank you. Terry, what are your views on the VUCA challenges and the construction industry faces today? Supply chain, lead time, labor shortages, backlog, extended payment terms. And we heard Ben referenced end-to-end partnerships. Can you give me your thoughts on all that?
Sure. I'll start with the supply chain, and I've put a lot of thought into this. It's no secret in our industry that relationships can either make or break us. That's the way this business works. It's all about relationships. So when I really look at this and look at the way if you want to call it the vertical hierarchy of the relationship flow, for years and years and years, the vendors have been on the bottom of the vertical pole. Then you've got your contractors, and then you've got your owners. So typically the way that works, I've seen it over many years. The vendors are coming after the contractors, they're coming after the owners. Of course they want to get work, but on the other hand, they want to continue to get more work. So what do they typically do? I'm sorry. If you're in San Antonio, they're probably going to bring you a box of breakfast burritos, okay? If you're in Houston, they're probably going to bring you a box of kolaches. If you migrate over to Louisiana, if you're lucky, you're going to get a king cake, okay? So you hit a home run. So with that being said, you've got your vendors working your contractors because they're trying to get their business. If they already have their business, then they want to get more business. Your contractors basically follow that same model. They're going after the customers to get an opportunity so they can get RFQs, so they can bid the work and win the work in hopes that they will get more work. So again, they're going to cater to the owners. They're going to bring them donuts, kolaches, maybe take them to lunch, maybe an occasional golf tournament, whatever. So that's the model we've been running for many, many years. And if I look at the challenges today, going back to some of the previous speakers that were up here, we talked about partnerships. And I think partnerships today are more important with all the challenges that we face today than anything I've ever experienced in my career. So with that being said, and I don't know, some of you may have already done this. These are my views, okay? My personal views. I think if we look at it in a different way and we go to the top of that vertical line and maybe work it back down the pole instead of up the pole, embrace your vendors, embrace your contractors, create that partnership, and maybe call them up, maybe take them to lunch. Create more collaboration, build your relationships. If I were, like I say, I've only got a couple more years, okay? But what I would do is I would really start working on my key vendors, the ones that can help you where you're falling short on the things that you need to make your business successful. That's on the supply chain. On the labor, labor's been an issue, even before COVID. When I come out of school, a lot of kids were going to apprenticeship programs. They were getting involved in technical schools and things of that nature. A lot of the owners and contractors have debated back and forth about, hey, you know, we can train people on site if you've got an in-house provider. You do that, you get them trained up, and then they typically jump ship and go to another contractor where they're paying more money. That's not all bad because you're putting talent back into the market, and a lot of these workers tend to go from company to company. That's not a bad thing. But there's another variable in there that we're dealing with today, and it's the fact that just a lot of people don't want to work. So that compounds the issue. And then the last piece of that is, you know, we thought we had a shortage of labor before, but now, as I mentioned earlier, we've got a lot of multi-billion-dollar expansions, multi-billion-dollar projects that are breaking ground. And the people that are getting these resources, they're paying competitive rates. And some of these owners have very deep pockets, and they will pay what they need to pay to get the best of the best. So it's a balance. You know, not every owner has deep pockets. So you go after what you can go out. As an owner, I would be very concerned if, you know, I was not working with my contractor that was my preferred contractor, if you want to call it that. And if I was not open-minded enough, if I was capable or able financially to offer a competitive rate. Because you know what you're going to get if you don't pay a competitive rate, and you don't want that resource on your project. You're going to have safety issues, you're going to have quality issues. And at the end of the day, when the project's over, 9 times out of 10, that project is going to cost you more than what it would have cost you if you would have paid a competitive rate up front. That's my personal view. What was the other topic?
Well, I was going to ask John.
Okay, well, go ahead. That's fine.
I was good because John, your organization does some pretty good things. In how you're capitalizing and preparing for the VUCA environment, and I know that some of the ways you work your payment terms are pretty competitive, and you start project planning 10 years out. Can you give us some more information around that?
Yeah, you know, we're always looking far out. It's not what we need a year or 2 years from now. A lot of these projects, of course, are large projects, and you know, a lot of the products that the market's asking for, like I said, go into sustainability and green. So we gotta have those products ready for when the plants come online, right? Whether it's an EV or it's a data center that wants to be greener, whatever, we have to have those products ready. So we're in a unique situation here, just like Dave. You know, we used to build 1 or 2 projects at a time, and now we're building like 5 and 6 and 7. So the reputation is crazy. And then back to Terry's point is, you know, how do we build the partnerships to get these things done? And as a team, we really came up with, hey, we have some core partners that's always done our projects, a small group. And we've grown that group over the last several years and got better partnerships on our projects. But we said, hey, let's take the teams that we know that we have a very good relationship with, a very good partnership, because those things take time.
Yes.
And you don't have a lot of time right now. Right. So we asked them to become a partner. How do we get moving? Because we have to have these projects moving at a very fast pace. So we brought them in. We've cut contracts on like 4 or 5 projects right now that won't break ground for a while. A lot of the work won't start for a year. But the whole idea is we're giving that partner an opportunity to go build the team they need. They have to build the team they need to get the project done. That's what's so important. If you wait to the last minute, however you do a contract, whatever, if you wait to the last minute to bring somebody in, there's no way somebody can get on the same page. So we bring them in early. We actually have leadership meetings with the very high levels of their team. And when we get on the same page, then we drive that down to the next level of supervision. So that's how we're functioning with so much movement going in different directions.
Okay, great.
Can I kind of elaborate a little bit on that?
Yes, please.
Because what he just described, that's what we have and have had for our rebuild projects that I mentioned earlier. I wrote something down that Joseph said earlier. It tied in my policies and procedures perspective. But we're on our growth projects, we're getting punched in the face, or what is it, getting punched in the mouth for stuff that was 18, 24 months ago, and they're just now hitting. So the decisions in our policy procedures, right before COVID, we had all these projects going. We had them estimated. We're ready to go. Obviously it was a very quick V-shaped curve, but we didn't know that uncertainty in that, and you didn't know when they're going to go to the board of directors to get approved, and et cetera, et cetera. But then when the economy did that such a quick V, now they want us to go. Well, now we're working on stuff that's 8, 9, 12 months old, or pricing and this and that, and inflation and things of that nature. So I think I've had the standing 8 count about 6 times in the last 6 months, just because of stuff that happened 18 months ago. But on the rebuilds, we had the partnerships. They knew our projects as well as we knew our projects. But on the growth projects, that's not been the case. And it's that quick V-shaped curve, and us not slowing down to double check where we were at. And then it gets into contracts, and it gets into where we don't work together on a conclusion. We were talking a little bit this morning that it goes into the contract writing, goes into policies and procedures to where I get it. I just can't change it because that my company doesn't allow. Okay, well then we're going to lose money and we're going to walk off the job. And you got to find a way to. That's what we have found ourselves in, is just trying to find a way to continue to move forward. But what we have not done is build a single partnership in the growth projects, and that's our big opportunity moving forward.
Okay. Great.
Angela?
Yes.
Can I just get a minute and a half?
Yes.
I want to
please.
piggyback off what John said, and kudos for the owners that are practicing that forward thinking. But there's one thing that I didn't mention when I was talking earlier. What I think would be a good idea for owners and contractors is maybe you need to take a hard look at your project management execution process, because the norms 3 to 5 years ago around lead time, whether you have a gated approach type project management process or a phased approach, I think some of those timelines probably need to be adjusted due to all the challenges that we're facing today in the VUCA world. So I would take a hard look at that, because what typically might take you 3 years to effectively plan a project could be 4 or 5 years now. And then the last piece of that is, I was talking to someone earlier, and I think it's a good idea, is maybe look at the possibility of somehow integrating some of your projects so you can get a jump on what some of the needs are far enough in advance. So that's why I said lead time. I think the lead time is even more critical today than it was 3 years, 5 years ago.
Okay, great.
Thank you.
So, Julia, given all these discussions, with all the challenges that we're facing and price volatility, what is your preferred method, delivery method, to be successful?
So, funny you should ask, because it was a week ago or 2 weeks ago, I was watching the Kansas City Bengals game, and my mind is kind of racing. It was an ambiguous game. You didn't really know how it was going to turn out, but I went to ChatGPT. Hopefully you guys have heard of that, right? So at some point, I'm sure we're going to look back and say, like, what were the first 3 questions that you asked ChatGPT? So I asked ChatGPT, what's the best delivery method in construction? And it gave a pretty good answer, right? It starts out, it lists them all, blah, 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 blah. And then at the end, it says, and sorry, I'm reading here because I couldn't remember it. It says, each method has its own advantages and disadvantages, and the choice of delivery method can impact the budget, schedule, quality, and level of risk for the project. It is recommended to carefully evaluate the project requirements and consult with construction professionals, so that's where we come in, with to determine the best method for a given project. And so while a good answer, right, similar to how you go to the doctor with all of your symptoms and you've already come up with your own diagnosis and what medicine you might think that you need, I do think it entails having a conversation with your partners and with your team. To me, the most three important aspects of choosing the project delivery method is, one, the experience of your team. Are you going to entrust a new or green team with hundreds of millions of dollars on a delivery method that they may have not ever experienced before, right? Experience is what you need just before you need it. So how do you train up folks? How do you upskill? How do you rely on others that have gone through it before? GSA has a project delivery method tool. It's basically a facilitated conversation. It spits out a spider graph. It'll say which one might be a better fit given the constraints and the risks and the opportunities that you might have. The second piece, I think, is money matters, timing matters, optics matter, right? And so I prefer to get the contractor on board as soon as possible, but I know that that's not always a possibility. Sometimes I only have money for design. Sometimes I only have a project and I still need to pitch it, make a really strong case for it, so I'm going to fully flesh out that design. I saw the universities are meeting here. The university deans have a conference here. Universities are known for that. A lot of times they're half-baking their project while they're still campaigning to get fundraising. There's many reasons why you might choose a traditional delivery method or can only go part way or have some sort of phased approach. And then lastly, I'll say it's a real good understanding of when to shift risk. You hear that all the time, and I would say for those of us that are up here, the true understanding of when to shift risk, that's code for you understand that someone else can do it better. I'm not going to buy the materials because I know that the GC or the sub can do it better. I'm not going to get in their way because I know that they can do it better. So when we say shifting risk, it really does mean acknowledging the strengths of your project team and not getting in the way, right? It comes back to a lot of what you've already heard, things that you can't measure: trust, collaboration, partnership. If at any moment in time you as a project team are pointing in a contract, I can tell you right now you're probably in a really bad place, right? I'm agnostic to which delivery method. I don't think that they dictate success. I truly do believe that it's the team and their experience, their trust with one another, their ability to be vulnerable with one another is what really defines a successful project.
Okay. Thank you. And that touches on kind of what Ben was saying about the pushing risk and the balancing and being able to have the foresight to choose the right path, you know, and not wait till the last minute because things are moving so quickly. So I'm just going to throw this out to the panel overall. Discussing some of the issues we've heard today, both with Joseph's presentation, building the partnerships, relationships, and how we look at the world, and with the customer view approach. And then also looking at what Ben had to say with the end-to-end partnerships. And I think we're all in agreement that getting ahead of it quickly and looking at a long-term, long-range look of how we're planning and bringing up the labor force, which we've all been trying to do for years. Is there any words of wisdom that this group could share around, you know, VUCA? Just, you know, what do you think the next steps are? I think we're going to be here a long time in this type of environment. And so any extras that you can add in?
I can start a little bit. You know, so what are we doing to solving the problems that I've tried to talk a little bit about this afternoon? What we're trying to do is take a look at in the mirror. We're trying to clean up our own house before we go out and try to build those partnerships in these growth projects. Because if we don't clean up some of our own, then we're just, you know, we talk about risk or shifting risk, and it'll go over there. So it would be the policies, procedures that I've hit on, or many other things. Do we have the right talent, right this, that? But we've hired in the last 6 months, 8 months, something of that nature. I'll leave the name out, so I'm not doing free advertising, but we've hired a third-party consultant to come in and just give us brutally candid feedback. And they have data from different projects, different industry of projects, different execution strategies, EPC, design, bid, build. Do you do reimbursable? Do you lump sum, GMAX, all of that stuff? They got data all around that. They come in and they're grading us throughout our stage gate process, and they're giving us it's sometimes very painful to hear that your design is weak, or your business case is this, your assumptions are that, or your schedule is unrealistic, but they're backing it up with data. And we're able to take that data to our senior leaderships, our executives, and we're starting to have some more productive conversations about how we can move forward, in particular with growth projects. But first, we're taking an approach first, let's clean up our own house. We could pass the buck. We've worked with some suppliers and contractors I'll never use again. But first step is look in the mirror, clean up our own house.
I can chime in here. I think for me, it's seek first to understand. When we first went into COVID and people started working remotely, everybody's like, who wouldn't want to do that? Well, ask the person sitting in a New York studio that's cleaning off their table every morning to go to work when they really were, before we're walking 5 blocks to an office to work. Talk to somebody that has a multi-generational family in their house and 7 dogs that has to manage work at home. They want to go to work. And so when you start doing that and start understanding what kind of problems we're addressing, what problems we're solving, you come to better solutions. I always challenge teams when they start, each of you write down all the folks around the table, what their KPIs are and what their performance metrics are. Because I know mine own, but the contractor doesn't know what mine are. I don't know what the contractors are. And so if we start getting that kind of understanding so we can start pulling together in a much more common way, we'll get past all this VUCA stuff, which is always going to be there. Construction, while we like to say is complicated, it's complex. It's like the weather. You got boards that you don't know when they're going to make a decision on funding. You got staff that you can or can't have. You got subs kind of running a little bit over what GCs say they can do because they have to get the contract signed. So all those kind of pieces are moving parts, and you really have to understand how do you make a win-win out of that group, and whether it's VUCA or not, that's really it's the people.
Yeah, I'll chime in a little bit. I don't see an end coming to VUCA anytime soon. And if you go back and you want to talk to contracts, the different kinds of contracts, I think the real focus is like, how do you manage the partnership? Because any contract you do, as soon as something's not right in the contract and it gets heated, then that partnership goes away and you're dead. So there's got to be somewhat, I would say, grace there. If you start very early on, we start projects sometimes with a few drawings, and we put numbers to those projects to get them going. So there has to be an understanding in the contract that we have boundaries we're working in, and you gotta, as a partner, you gotta hold up your side of the deal of that. You gotta be very transparent. And I see the stage gates there, they have to happen very quick. You can't just have, hey, we're gonna check up on this on 2-3 months. It's got to be like immediate. Like as soon as you see something, you have got to be transparent. We can solve problems if we have communication, and you let us. But to do that, you have to have a team that functions well and communicates well, and they're open to have that conversation. Yes. Because typically, what happens in our world is nobody wants to say nothing until they truly think they have a problem. And when they truly have a problem, it's like a nuclear bomb just went off and we have a major problem. So if they could be a little bit more transparent and say, hey, I'm seeing we're going down a wrong direction right now. We could, stall a part of a project or hold off on a certain area until we get closer to the end and know we have enough capital for extra square footage of storage or whatever. But you got to have that everyday communication is the only way you can get there.
Well, and I will say from an insurer perspective, we want you to have that everyday communication, because when that bomb goes off, then we usually get the call. So,
Absolutely.
the fewer bombs, the better off we all are. So, but I want to thank you all for the input and the information. It's very much appreciated. And Greg, did we have any questions?
We do. First of all, let's give it up for our team.
Well, good job, guys. Good job.
Thanks, Angela and team. So one of the questions that came in is we've heard things like teams, partnerships, collaboration, trust, relationship building, communication. Engineering schools used to jive those for being soft skills. Now we're discovering they're mission critical business skills. What advice do you have for the academicians among us or the young adults, the new entrants among us, to build those kind of absolutely mission critical skill sets? Collaboration, building partnerships, building relationships, developing trust, etc.
I'll maybe start. I mean, I give this advice to my kids all the time. I tell them, you got to be smart, right? You have to learn. You're competing with everyone else in your level and your grade. You have to work hard. That's what gets us all to where we currently are right now. You have to get along with people. We're in the people business. We don't sell real estate. We sell spaces for people to connect and accomplish their mission. And then there's an element of fortune, luck that also comes into play here. But we deal with very complex projects, aligning ourselves and getting along, being directionally accurate on where we want to go. I'll just tell a small story here. Is GSA has this construction excellence program, and it's essentially therapy for the construction and individuals on a project. We have peers come in, they walk the job site at various stages, the 15%, 30%, 75%. And they get an understanding of where the job site is at, and then they have a series of questions that they ask the architect. And just the architect is in the room. Then they do it with the contractor, they do it with the CMA, et cetera, with the owner. And the very last question on the job is, what are you most proud of? And I was able to sit in on a construction excellence peer review in New York, where we were building out the largest FBI field counterterrorism office. And I can tell you on that job, scope, schedule, risk, budget, they weren't aligned. And it was difficult. It was a very difficult project to achieve. But everyone on that last question answered with, I have such pride with my country, what this means to the city of New York, what it means to me personally. I'm going to find a way to make this work. If that doesn't give you chills, right? A $100 million project on trying to accomplish that, when the stars are not aligned, and to still be able to deliver a successful project, that's essentially how it's done.
Outstanding. How about some of the others? You care to weigh in on this emerging mission-critical business skill set that's often missing?
Yeah, absolutely. I would say, communication and trust, they kind of go together, but you have to be intentional about how you do that. And communication, we just had a conversation how difficult it can be to communicate. If you're sending text messages, emails, we work with a lot of technical, smart people, right? We all do. They want to get a question answered. They want to move on. And we got a small network of team that can do that. But to grow that team, to attack more projects, to get more done, we have to be intentional about growing other relationships. That takes time. And everybody's really busy. It's very challenging. But you have to take that time, just like the Kurt. This is a great time to be intentional, meet people, find resources, and solve problems. But you got to be very intentional about it.
And I would add, in how you can, in these relationships, how you can grow together. Mm-hmm. John and his company does steel rebar, we do composite rebar, so we're competitors in this space, but we're both wanting to sell to these folks, with these folks, doing their projects. And there's those type of opportunities, the data centers and others here with wall systems. When you get when we do things well, then we can elevate it to our even senior leaders of our companies that then can go look for business opportunities that are what we need for, being sustainable business-wise 3, 5, 10 years from now.
And getting back to the question on what do the academies need to do, when I was in school way back when, I knew there was a civil engineering school on campus. I knew there was a construction management school on campus. I didn't talk to them. We didn't talk to them. We talked to the architecture folks. We stayed in architecture school doing projects, and a lot of those projects were one-person projects. We had, I think maybe in my 5 years, two team projects that you did. The rest was all individual. Now it is moving toward that. We just hired 5 students last year, recent grads, and the academies are coming around to that. So they did have kind of cross-pollination. They had studios that had multiple disciplines in it, and so to all of us in this room, listen to the people that are coming into the industry. They are taught differently than we are. Their minds are wired differently than we are. And so take advantage of what they learned in their last 5 years and see if we can start to move this industry.
Great input. Now, here's an interesting question. With policy and procedure review and the idea that we need to partner, collaborate, and trust, procurement often seems to be the dirty dog in the equation.
I hear it every time I'm down here.
Owners are typically pushing payment terms to 90, 120, even 150 days out. Why do they not understand what's going on, and how can we right-side the ship? Crickets.
Well, I'd say it's a two-way street. I get it. I mean, I absolutely give it. Recent project, we gave someone a $10 million project, and they still fell flat on their face. I mean, literally up front to go buy and eliminate the risk of inflation. They didn't do it. Now, they didn't do it because in many cases, the people they were counting on that they had built the package then got a better job and walked away. And so then it's real, it's money, it's got to be fair. There's programs out there like supply chain financing as well. I mean, we talk about, I heard somewhere today, people are willing to do 2% discounts to get paid in 10 or 15, whatever it is. There's solutions. We happen to use supply chain financing if cash flow is that important in lieu of just a normal discount. But again, perspectives. I'm held to some different accountabilities, cash flow, so that we can go acquire other companies and grow. So, yeah, there's perspectives.
Other comments on point?
Just a little commercial for the government. We pay in 30 days after an approved invoice, standard across the board. But to acquisition, our acquisition has to catch up with the conversations we're having today. We talk about integrated project delivery. We talk about all the things that make sense collectively for the industry. We've got to get past some of, and this is the industry, not just public sector. We got to get past some of the antiquated procedures and policies we have in place that we've relied on low these many years that haven't been working, and figure out how do we start to retool that with a little more agility.
Here's one for the GSA. Y'all discussed using various technologies to communicate effectively. Have you added any new tools to communicate project information across multiple platforms more effectively? Any consolidation tools? Question mark.
Go for it, Kuba.
Well, I talked about introducing our virtual inspections program. We also have a new project management software that's out there. We have tools. I mean, I think any owner can rattle off 7 or 8 tools. The infrastructure is really difficult, and that is hard to move on, because we are becoming a data-driven organization, much like everyone else. But yes, those tools are in place. We're trying to help our customers to make decisions a lot of times on project delivery. I can't necessarily move out in a direction that I want to go to because I don't have certainty from the customer. Do they want to expand space? Do they want to shrink space? Are they going to renew their lease? Are they going to go back? So all of those, I think, not just technology, it is a multi-layered conversation with your customer, with the industry. What are you trying to achieve? There's 1,000 different tools out there. I just mentioned ChatGPT. I mean, I could probably ask it anything, right? But it's not going to always give me the right intel. There's always the data and the story that have to intersect in order to make a right decision on moving forward.
An appropriate technology and sharing of that technology amongst not only our clients, but also our team. So contractors, subs, looking at that and having the information they need to make decisions. And just from a client perspective, when someone's asking about, oh, well, you haven't built anything, like we can move all these walls around, you can pop up a video and say, here's what's going on right now. They have done a lot of work on that, and that's going to cost us money. So you can start using it to educate too. But it's figuring out what that balance is. It's not everything, but it's a curated kind of sharing.
Great input, Chuck and company. Thank you. So here's an interesting one. We've heard from contractors about the workforce crisis in the craft areas. Are you using any new strategies or practices to attract professional young adults to your organizations, per diems, overtime, amenities, paid lunches, et cetera? Open questions for anyone.
So I'll just jump in. I mean, I think I heard part of the question. I don't think I heard it in full, but there are a lot of projects out there that are paying what I would call escalated rates, some form of escalated per diem, even in those markets where people don't live, say, within a 50-mile radius, and they're working extended hours. That's hard to compete against if you're not one of the big players that has really deep pockets. So, you know, they're going to pull in all of these craft resources because they're getting the per diem, they're getting escalated pay rates, they're getting extended hours. So it's hard for another owner to recruit that's got a project that's working 410s, we're not offering per diem, and we're paying significantly less than what some of the other big players are paying. Now, I didn't hit on this earlier, but we did talk about it a little bit earlier. These big projects that are paying these escalated rates, they're pulling in a lot of your top quality craft people in the U.S. I'm going to take advantage of this. This might be a little bit of a sales pitch, but at AG&P, I mean, we actually have the luxury. We have a way to supplement our domestic workforce. We have 18,000 workers over in the Philippines that are highly skilled. It's a combination of direct and indirect. So we've been plugging in some of these highly skilled Filipino workers with our domestic workers, and that is shaping up very well because that's a way to supplement some of the shortages that we see today. So anyway, if anyone has any questions on that, our booth is 207. We'd be glad to talk to you.
Let me ask one more question. Are any of your organizations exploring using best practice methodologies such as advanced work packaging, AWP, or lean construction, IPD, to increase performance reliability or schedule predictability? Thoughts on the use of those tools?
We're rolling out a series of lean delivery training across the country. It's in a partnership with COA. They're bringing in a contractor, an architect, and an owner to teach the class and really showcase why it's a value creation aspect, talk about the conditions of satisfaction, pull scheduling, last planner, et cetera. I think it's worth broaching that subject over and over and over again because you might think that you know how to do it and there's always going to be a better way.
Other thoughts from other folks?
Was this on technology? Was that the question?
Well, I've got to find it. Oh, no, it was using advanced work packaging, IPD, lean project delivery, those kinds of tools. How successfully have you implemented those kinds of tools to increase performance reliability and schedule predictability?
Well, the only thing I can say is there's a lot of technology out there. A lot of companies use Primavera for scheduling for the very large projects. But there's a lot of tools out there right now, and we're actually exploring some technology right now that will do so much more than just your schedule, progress reporting, your cost reports. There's a safety module. I mean, there's all kind of technology out there to help get real-time data. So that's something we're looking at in-house.
Many of you have faced procurement departments that are typically 3 bids and a buy. How do you get over that, circumvent that with your partnership approach to contracting?
Can you repeat that?
I couldn't
Yeah, I couldn't hear.
Many owners are required to submit 3 bids and a buy to procurement. How do you circumvent that and move toward a more collaborative partnership arrangement of contracting?
Well, we don't circumvent anything.
I'll jump in. I mean, when we bring all of our partners together, I mean, we still somewhat competitive bid it, right? We'll put a contract debate, we'll have 2 or 3 look at it, and we'll basically pick who we're gonna go with from a partnership standpoint. So we still had other input from other contractors or partners to see where we're going. So we do, there is some validation there in the process.
Yeah, through our strategic part, some stuff needs, in my opinion, some stuff needs to be 3 bids and a buy, because it's not strategic, it's off the shelf, it's whatever, you don't have any history to know if you're getting fair market or not.
Right.
So there's that part, and then there's maybe what is more being referred to in this question. But through your partnerships, if you're we haven't done on our growth yet, but on the other projects I mentioned earlier, we have plenty of agreements that we don't bid anything. That's the strategic sourcing part of my team. I have a procurement side that writes the purchase orders and gets the stuff done, and then I have a team that's focused on the strategic side. The strategic side, you still put through rigor, you still make sure you have the right partners, you have checks and balances, you have open book, whatever it may be, but we can go boom, 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 boom. If we use our LRP to, okay, here's how many of these we're going to need in the next 3 to 5 years, and I'm exaggerating to some degree. Same with our engineering partners, et cetera. So it's not, I mean, again, I hear this when I come down here all the time. You got a procurement department, if that's what you think. You need a strategic sourcing department, would be my guidance to you.
That might be a good note to stand on. Transitioning procurement to, what did you call it?
Strategic sourcing.
Strategic sourcing. Angela, I want to thank you for putting the panel together. We've had a plethora of different viewpoints on all these subjects. Let's show them our appreciation. I have a dozen more questions here that we don't have time to answer. So that's one of the neat things about the networking breaks and our events tonight. You can buttonhole these people. I've got a dozen questions that we never got to, maybe 18. But they'll all be around this evening, and feel free to approach them. They're very approachable, very good folks, resourceful and approachable. Angela, once again, thank you and team for your service to this conference.